think interpreting data, a lot of times owners would look at the checkbook, see what's in there, see what's out there for inventory, see how many trucks there are, look at the whiteboard, see how many jobs there are. And those are their KPIs. And
Right.
now the data is so much more detailed. The software can generate 10, 15 KPIs that are always at your fingertips. And I think the most successful owners, Scott, they look at those KPIs daily or at least weekly, oftentimes a couple times a week, and they understand where they stand today. And then what that means 2 or 3 weeks from now and 2 and 3 months from now as they look ahead. And you know exactly where those cash levels should be and the receivables and when payroll is going to land and when things get to be paid for and what's coming in on the receivables. That's a big issue now, as we all know, and that's a whole nother
Yes.
discussion.
Oh,
But
yes.
I think for me, you've got to be intentional with the data that you have, and it's more or less a mindset. You've got to want that data. You've got to understand what it means for your business and seek it out. You just can't be lackadaisical about it anymore.
You've said something that sticks. An owner's normal is rarely a buyer's normal. What does that mean in practice? What are the things some owners are completely comfortable with that can make a buyer very uncomfortable or even walk away?
Well, and I've alluded to it, a seller's normal. I hear a lot, Scott, that it's turnkey, that it's ready to go. I've got a great staff. The
Right.
books are great. And everyone's got a lens that they see the world through. And no owner wants to call their baby ugly for sure. And neither do I. That's not my
True.
job. But it
Right.
is my job to be realistic and say, this is acceptable. A buyer's going to like this or they're going to love that. And it's why I
Mhm.
go through what I go through in the education process versus a buyer's going to expect something different. It's normal to you because you've been doing it for 15 years this way. It's
Right.
not normal to a buyer. And you probably know what a quality of earnings is. There's probably many listeners that do as well. But a quality of earnings is a deep dive financially to find every nook and cranny where those dollars are. And there's no place to hide. It's a very invasive process. And so when you think about normal and what's acceptable, sometimes those are two very different things. And if a buyer is going to write a 5 million, 10 million, 20, 30, 40, $50 million check,
Mm.
you better believe they're going to verify and that their expectation meets what's normal. And if not, there needs to be a discussion to get that to gap bridged because there's going to be a discrepancy.
Most restoration business owners are running hard just to stay in place, great at the work, but without a clear playbook for what comes next. Restoration Insider exists to change that. Hosted by Scott Sandel, the Chief Revenue Officer at Karma Staff, this series brings honest conversation with coaches, consultants, and industry leaders shaping how restoration works. The real conversations are happening here, the real decisions, hard lessons, and strategies behind sustainable growth. This episode features JT Cry, founder of Exit Strategies 360 and one of the most trusted M&A advisors in the restoration industry. For 25 years, JT has helped restoration business owners do two things: understand what their company is actually worth and get the most out of it when it's time to move on. With over $1 billion with a B in transactions completed, he knows where value hides, how to defend it, and how to find the right buyer when the time comes. His philosophy is simple. Educated decisions are always the best, and for restoration owners within 5 years of an exit, the decisions made right now will determine everything. Scott, the floor is yours.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. JT, great to have you on here. Really looking forward to our discussion here in the next 30, 40 minutes. And so welcome.
Terrific. Thanks for having me. And I don't know how to live up to that introduction, but I sure appreciate it. Thank you.
That's awesome. So let's jump right in. You've described the restoration industry as transitioning from blue collar to gray collar to white collar. So walk us through that shift and what's driving that? What does it look like right now? And what does it mean for an owner who is still running the business the way they did 5 years ago?
There's a lot to unpack in that question. When I got in the industry in 2007, and I've mentioned that it's gone from blue collar to gray collar to white collar for a reason. 20 years ago, a lot of the owners were still on the truck. There wasn't apps. There was very little software to use. They were running their business, Scott, on a hunch and a gut feel. They
Right.
always kind of knew where they stood, and some would say that's just good business, right? But now, fast forward to 2012, 13, 14, there was a really nice introduction of some software packages. We started with some remote camera systems, and the technology started to be introduced into the industry. So it started to shift a little bit. But a lot of the owners are still on the trucks. They're not fully utilizing all this technology. And now, fast forward to today, we've got all kinds of real time accounting packages. We've got handhelds out in the field. And what I mean by shifting to white collar is that the owners have come to realize that relying on this real time data, when a
Mhm.
tech enters something out in the field, it's now live in the office in just a few seconds later. And these owners, I think everyone could admit there's very little low hanging fruit anymore, and you've got
Right.
to maximize what we've been given and what's available. And using real time data with intentional and purposeful decisions is a great way to do that. So my position is we've got to get the remainder of the owners in the industry off the truck and in the office and thinking like owners, not like workers who have a job, but really trying to be strategic in their decisions.
Absolutely. No, that's a great response. I know that resonated with me early on in my career in restoration. A lot of the owners I worked with were formerly techs for maybe another restoration business and then thought,
Yep.
hey, I can do this. And you know what? They did a great job from a customer service standpoint, production, all of that. But when it
Yeah.
came to really understanding the dynamics of running a business, that's where they struggled. And I love the response you gave there. So obviously, as it's transitioning to white collar, what does that look like practically? What
Mhm.
changed about the day-to-day running of these companies?
Well, and I think I've mentioned it, and I'll take a little deeper dive, but the same skill set that starts from ground zero, and many of these owners started their company or bought into a small company. You can get up to 1,000,000, 5,000,000, 8 without too many issues. Being a
Right.
one horse owner and you wear a lot of hats, and I sold a lot of those back in the day. It's a different skill set required to break through that $2.5 million ceiling to get up to 5 million, 6 million, 7 million, and beyond.
Most
And
definitely.
so, number one, I would say that you've got to learn how to delegate and build a team. And you've got to realize that it doesn't all have to flow through you. If you can realize those two things and learn how to duplicate yourself a little bit, I mean, that's a really good start. Secondly, I think interpreting data, a lot of times owners would look at the checkbook, see what's in there, see what's out there for inventory, see how many trucks there are, look at the whiteboard, see how many jobs there are, and that those were their KPIs. And
Right.
now the data is so much more detailed. The software can generate 10, 15 KPIs that are always at your fingertips. And I think the most successful owners, Scott, they look at those KPIs daily or at least weekly, oftentimes a couple times a week, and they understand where they stand today and then what that means 2 or 3 weeks from now and 2 and 3 months from now as they look ahead. And you know exactly where those cash levels should be and the receivables and when payroll's going to land and when things get to be paid for and what's coming in on the receivables. That's a big issue now, as we all know, and that's a whole nother
Yes.
discussion.
Oh,
But
yes.
I think for me, you've got to be intentional with the data that you have, and it's more or less a mindset. You've got to want that data. You've got to understand what it means for your business and seek it out. You just can't be lackadaisical about it anymore.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
I think obviously one of the things that owners struggle with is really preparing their business at some point to sell, whether it's right now, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So you've said that an exit strategy or an exit ready business doesn't mean you're selling now. It means you're professional, well organized, and built to run without the owner grinding through every job. So walk us through what
Yeah.
that actually looks like.
Well, I'm smiling because people think that when they reach out to me that I'm going to try to push a sale and that with a phone call or an email I'm going to suggest that they go to market. That is the furthest thing from the truth. Truth. For anyone listening, I'm not on your timing committee. I'm just not. That's between you, your spouse, a financial advisor, and maybe a doctor. But it's not. I'm not on that committee. Okay.
Right? Good.
So my goal is to get you educated. I want owners to make a really good decision. And I've been in their shoes 3 times. And when I was going through this process, the lack of data that I had was astounding. And you're
Mm,
trying to make $1 million decision with millions at stake from an emotional position without any real data. So first, it's when people reach out to me, I don't push anything. Let's just get you some good answers. And an exit ready business, this is point number two. An exit ready business doesn't mean you have to sell.
right.
It doesn't. It means it's got clean books, it's got systems and procedures in place, It's got a level of professionalism that's higher than it was when you started getting it cleaned up. The trajectory hopefully is up. You've got a good team in place. It doesn't mean you have to sell. And this is, to me, it's simple, Scott. If it's a benefit to you as an owner, it's definitely going to be a benefit to a buyer.
Right.
So being exit ready doesn't mean you have to sell. It means you could sell. And that's a relief for a lot of owners, because a lot of owners, and I say this kind of tongue in cheek, a lot of owners, we're in the emergency business. They can't see past Thursday or the end of the month, let alone the end of the year or 3 to 5 years down the road. So I try to fill in a lot of blanks and get them to look that far down the road, and then they can back up and start planning accordingly.
Okay. No, that's great information. So when you look across the spectrum of owners that you've worked with, what's usually the fastest variable to fix?
Oh, the fastest variable. Well, I typically look at 10. There's really 10 to 15. But the one that I see most often that's not correct is clean books. And I will talk to owners, and you've been a business owner, you understand these are complicated chart of accounts, right? And they'll say, "Oh, my books are spotless. My wife doesn't." Well, great, but we probably still have ask the accountant categories. We have miscellaneous categories. We've got a lot of personal expenses buried in there. I mean, Scott, I've seen people build homes through their business, right? They create a job file and build a home. It's amazing what can get expensed. So from my seat, clean to a seller is different than clean to a buyer. And it has to tell the financial story. And so if a buyer can a seller can take the blinders off and understand what normal is and understand what clean financials actually means, it's a great first step, hands down.
Oh, that's huge. Exactly. I've seen so many owners that just operate off the checkbook versus the P&L and the balance sheet. So great advice. You've said something that sticks. An owner's normal is rarely a buyer's normal. What does that mean in practice? What are the things some owners are completely comfortable with that can make a buyer very uncomfortable or even walk away?
Well, and I've alluded to it, a seller's normal. I hear a lot, Scott, that it's turnkey, that it's ready to go. I've got a great staff. The books are great. And everyone's got a lens that they see the world through. And no owner wants to call their baby ugly, for sure. And neither do I. That's not my job. But it is my job to be realistic and say, this is acceptable. A buyer's going to like this, or they're going to love that. And it's why I go through what I go through in the education process, versus a buyer's going to expect something different. It's normal to you because you've been doing it for 15 years this way. It's not normal to a buyer. And you probably know what a quality of earnings is. There's probably many listeners that do as well. But a quality of earnings is a deep dive financially to find every nook and cranny where those dollars are. And there's no place to hide. It's a very invasive process. And so when you think about normal and what's acceptable, sometimes those are two very different things. And if a buyer is going to write a $5 million, $10 million, $20, $30, $40, $50 million check, you better believe they're going to verify and that their expectation meets what's normal. And if not, there needs to be a discussion to get that gap bridged, because there's going to be a discrepancy.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you've seen before so many times that really the lack of infrastructure is a challenge for some of these owners that maybe come to you and say, "Hey, I'm ready to sell." And you look at it and you think, "Hey, we have something to sell here, but it's going to need some work." What are some of those challenges that you've had in those discussions, helping that owner to understand that?
There's another loaded question. I love these questions.
Sorry.
No, it's great. What happens is I'll come back to these 15 variables that I look at, right? And what's interesting on one end of the spectrum, and these are anything from financial trends and customer bases to human capital to the cleanliness of books, which we talked about, to the type of clients and your risk factors and the largest projects, that we can lump lots of things into this. And when I show people the list, I've had twice in the last couple of years, I can just show the list and I run every client through a sample valuation and analysis. We don't need to take a deep dive on that today, but there's these lists of variables. I've had a couple times where clients look at that and they go, "Ooh, is that my sort of scorecard?" And I say, "Yes, it is. We're going to go through all these." And they say,
Mm,
"You know what? I've got way too much work to do. I'm a mess in all these areas." And they press pause on me going through that process with them. It's totally
wow.
okay. But when you look at the list, and part of that is just being self-aware that they understand now, they get a little glimpse of how their business is going to be viewed. But the companies who are striving to be more organized, they look at that list and say, I'm good on points 2, 3, and 4. 5, I could use a little help. 6 and 7, I think I'm good on. 8, ooh, that I need some help there.
Right.
But they're aware enough about their own entities where they know where they can improve. And then it's my job to say, okay, Mr. Seller, with these points, if we fix them, we can add X% in value with your natural growth trends. A year from now, 2 years, 3 years from now, we're going to keep adding value. Well, I can run the numbers backwards and get them numbers 2, 3, 4 years out. Now they've got real numbers to make decisions with, not just pie in the sky. But
No,
I think if I answered your question right, it's those
you
12 to
did.
15 variables that really matter.
100%. No, that's great. Let's shift a little bit to technology. So, this has always been for the last few years the topic of discussion, AI, all of that. So, thinking about that, software outsourcing and AI playing a much larger role in how restoration companies operate ever more than ever before. So, from
Yeah.
where you sit, how are these tools changing the value equation for restoration businesses?
Because I'll tell you, AI and outsourcing, we're on such the cutting edge of these things. Outsourcing has been around a couple of years now. It's still relatively new. You guys are doing a great job. In
Thank
fact,
you.
I just had a client tell me, "Listen, I can go get 2 or 3 full-time assistants compared to one here. Why wouldn't I go do that?
Right.
Going through an outsourcing company." So if there's listeners that want to understand what kind of problems can be solved, reach out to Karma staff. There's great problems that can be solved with some
Thank you.
outsourcing of some of these positions. So, but it's changing. It really is changing. And part of the challenge there, Scott, is owners don't know what they're solving for. They
Mm,
know there's a pain point and not quite sure how to solve it with remote position. 15 years ago, we didn't have people sitting all over the country in one company.
right.
I work with a couple of accounting firms that specialize in this space. They've got, accountants sitting all over the country. And you couldn't do that in the restoration space. Well, now you can. So between the outsourcing of any number of things, from estimating to admin to, claims, there's lots of things as we know. But the newest element here is the AI and what
Mm,
that means. And we're still learning. I think we're all still learning where that's going to
yes.
go and how deep that's going to penetrate the industry. So I'd like to separate the two, but the technology in general as an umbrella topic, if owners are not grabbing onto technology and they're trying to run their business the same way they did 5 or 8 years ago, you know, if you're 60, 65 and hanging on for another few years and the technology scares you, I get that. I work with some people like that, but it's the younger, it's the kids of those owners essentially that's bringing the industry up to 2026 standards with technology. And it's a wonderful thing. And it's intimidating to me. And I'm on technology every day. But if you can
Right.
understand it and put it to work, it's going to solve some of your sort of downward pressure on your margins that we're all experiencing.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
Great information there. So what's the biggest efficiency gap you see in restoration companies right now? The thing that's costing them the most that they're just not paying attention to.
Well, and I think it's, boy, we're all, let me say it this way. We're all familiar with the headwinds that we're facing, right? There is no low hanging fruit anymore. We've had a couple of mild winters. We've got slow pay on the carriers. We've got, all these things that we're fighting. And I think most owners are well beyond the downward pressure. For 5, 6, 7, 8 months, the downward pressure occurs and everybody's hoping that the phone rings. They
Mm,
don't let go of certain people because they're now trained. They don't want to, they
right.
don't adjust fast enough. We'll say that was an issue in the industry. I think most people are past that now. And I think one of the biggest issues, and I think there's a couple, one is that learning how the new technology works. You ask the average owner about SEO and pay-per-click and AI and buzzwords and algorithms for Google, they have no idea. And there are
Right.
companies that have really good luck with that, and others that just mail off a check every month and they don't even know if it's working. I mean,
No,
I've
you're
got
not getting the
clients
results.
that's right, and I have clients that spend two, three, $400,000 a year on these things cumulatively, and they don't really know if they're working. Okay, and then secondly, and I find this over and over, and the two are connected, is where every owner is trying to take advantage of the leads that they have.
Mhm.
And I'm astonished, Scott, at how few companies have soft skills training. The
Hmm.
phone rings and we've got a minimum wage person answering the phone or close to minimum wage without any real sales training. They may or
Yeah.
may not have ever walked a mitigation job. They don't really understand what that client's going through on one of the worst days of their life. And they're trying to capture this lead now. And
Right.
I think there's a renewed emphasis right now, not only on commercial, there's a lot of companies going after commercial, but that soft skills training to increase your closing rate, not only on the leads that come in, but then increase it from the mid to the recon. And if you just up that 5 or 8 or 10%, which is not complicated, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars on the top line, and many times millions, depending on the size of the company that you're in. So to me, some soft skills training will go a long ways as well.
No, that's a great point. I think the owners that really enforce that with their team from the very beginning talk about in sales. You and I could go down a rabbit hole on sales for these, but
Sure.
really everybody in the company has a somewhat of a role with sales from the
Yeah,
moment somebody picks up that phone, and if they don't understand how this thing works and what the person on the other end is going through,
that's
yeah,
right.
then you can miss some great opportunities there. Great information,
Yeah.
JT. I love this discussion. So let's bring this home for the owners who are thinking, you know what, I've got some work to do. So whether they want to sell in 2 years or 20, what can they do in the next 90
Yeah.
days to start closing that gap from where they are and where they should be, JT?
Well, there's a gap of fear in here, right? What is somebody like me going to say? What's a consultant going to say when you
Yeah.
sort of peel back the sheets? And what are we going to find? And it's a very vulnerable place for people. Let me just lead with that. We're
Hmm.
not talking about, hey, let's go boost some conversion rates. We're talking about um, a direct tie to somebody's life's work. And I mentioned earlier, I don't like calling anybody's baby ugly, but I will point out things if we need to. So if you're nervous, I say ask nervous. If you're a little bit afraid, ask afraid. The key is to ask some questions because
Right.
without that, you're going to stay right where you are.
Yeah.
And if you're afraid of what you're going to find and you're just totally content with how you're doing it today, and people who are content and kind of resting on their laurels, the clock's moving. I mean, it's going to leave you behind. And if you don't grab on to a certain change or two that's coming, you're not going to progress. So, first, I'd say just ask, understand where you're at and where you can improve. And I love, and this gets back to me not being on anyone's committee.
Hmm.
Several times, Scott, I've taken clients through evaluation analysis and said, listen, you're a $22 million company now. If we fix these 3 or 4 variables, you're going to be 26 or 27. Let's fast forward a year or two with your 8 or 9 or 10 or 12% year over year growth. And I can work the numbers backwards and
Hmm.
say, let's fix these three things. Let's add on your growth. You're just getting into contents, or you're just getting into storage, whatever it is that you're starting. Maybe it's asbestos. And I can forecast the numbers out. And they'll say, really, if I fix that, and there's a direct tie, there's a direct ROI on efforts on some of these things, and we keep growing the next 3 years, and then I'm going to be worth 28 or 29 or 30 million. Absolutely. It's my job to share that with you. Well, now you can sell whenever you want. If you want to sell next week, that's great. We'll put you on the market and recruit the best buyers. My recommendation is let's fix a couple things,
Hmm.
let that play out, let the results hit the bottom line, and then whether it's a year or two, then we'll sell at a
Mm.
higher value. And the millions of dollars that come back to the owner on that is impressive. So it's all tied together. And that's really where it comes into me not being on anybody's timing committee. And then secondly to that, it gives them time to plan because there's a lot of people that think they're going to sell and 10 days later they're going to be toes up in the Caribbean. Well, that doesn't work either. Most
Right.
of what I sell now is either industry based or PE based. They're north of 6 to 8 million in transaction value, and they're throwing off at least $1 million in adjusted EBITDA, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. But
Right.
in that world, you're going to stick around and train for a while. Okay, your key employees are going to stick around and train for a while. So ask the questions. Learn how we're going to minimize your taxes or even avoid some taxes with some completely legal strategies. Understand what your financial advisor wants to do. Do we need to put your business into a trust? How are you going to preserve 15, 18, 30, $40 million? Let's fill in some of those gaps. So when your head hits the pillow at night, you've got answers to all these key questions. Now you can sell anytime you want. You've got answers. And
Yeah.
if you get bad news from the doctor, if you are in a partnership dispute, if something, as I say, if life happens and you need to pull the trigger, you're ready to go.
Right.
The thing I hear the most is, I should have called you 2 or 3 years ago when I first thought about it.
Yeah.
And it's terrible for me to hear, but they need to sell right now. And there's no time to fix anything. And we just left several $1 million on the table. So the two things are ask questions, not only of the business, but then ask questions of how you need to preserve that wealth. And let's get a little bit organized. It's not intimidating. It's not complicated. There's maybe 10 or 12 really key questions. And when people hear the word exit strategy, they think this is going to be this year-long process and spend all kinds of money trying to find answers. And that's absolutely not the case. You need a few key answers, and your peace of mind will thank you for it.
Absolutely. No, that's great information. And to close it out, what is the owner who wakes up on a Friday morning and just decides, you know what, I am done. I need to get out of this. What do they need to hear right now?
Boy, that's a loaded question. It depends on their situation. Okay. And I'm going to, not to sound like an economist, but it depends. Okay.
Right.
If they wake up on a Friday morning and they sit, let me say it this way. I get one call a year on average from somebody sitting in a hospital parking lot. They just got some terrible news. And their attitude is, I met you a few years ago. I heard you. I read an article, yada, yada. I need to sell now. And I don't care whether it's 12 million or 15 million or 18 million. I need out because I got months. Those are tough. Okay. There's no looking back on that conversation. The ones that wake up and think, I'm a little tired, I'm a little burned out, and can we sell it by next Thursday? By the way, I don't want to be here next weekend. We're not selling a good used Ford here on Craigslist. Okay. The way I like to back that up is, if you've got a $20 million business, you probably have $2.5 to $3.5 million of assets, vehicle fleets, desiccants, heaters, blowers, etc., you name it, which means 95% of what we're selling is intangible.
Right.
That requires a story. It requires a great defense to build the defenses for all this intangible value. That's what an advisor does. So depending on the situation, I might say, Mr. Seller, I know you're tired. I know you're burned out. Your wife's frustrated. You're working a lot. However, there's an extra $3 million in it if you can hang in there for a year or 2 years. Is it worth it to you? It's not my call. Again, if they say, you know what, it's not going to affect my retirement, let's just go. I can, but they're fully aware of those decisions. And as long as it's intentional, I'm fine. But when they say, or if they say, you know what, I'll fix a few things. I'll talk to my wife. We can hang in there 18 months. Give me 6 months to fix this and 11, 12 months to sell it, in these larger companies. And you're telling me we can put another couple million in the bank? And I say, yep, we can do that. Then it's worth it. And that's another intentional choice. So when I get the phone call on a Friday morning and there's no options, it's a very different phone call than if there are options. How's that?
100%. That's great information. And I think what they, on top of that, what they can hear is that there is hope. It just may not happen quite as fast as they want it to, but certainly you're the guy that can walk them through that. And I so appreciate the information you shared. This has been enjoyable for me. I hope anybody who's tuning into this gets a lot of value from this. I know I did. And I so appreciate your time. Great information, JT.
Thank you, Scott. Sure appreciate it.
All right. Bonjour.
Yes, sir. Thank you guys. That's a wrap on this episode. So if you've ever wondered what your business is actually worth or what it could be worth with the right preparation, JT just gave you the reason to find out now rather than later. So connect with JT at Exit Strategies 360 at exitstrategies360.com and follow the show for more conversations just like this one. Restoration Insider is brought to you by KarmaStaff, the staffing company built specifically for the restoration industry. And visit us at karmastaff.com. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.